I just want to spend a couple of minutes reflecting on Psalm 31 before I move to a narrative meditation based on the account of Peter denying Christ. It's a reflection that I wrote as I looked at Peter's denial and tried to put myself in his position. After the narrative, we'll spend some time in silence as we reflect on Peter's denial. We'll ask ourselves, have we ever been in the same situation where we have failed Christ or denied him ourselves? But why Psalm 31? The psalm has the title Prayer and Praise for Deliverance from Enemies. And as we come to Christ and we praise and worship him, and as we serve him, the enemy will be trying to stop us in our tracks. Remember, Jesus himself was tempted in the wilderness. He won that battle, but Satan continues to tempt us, trying to get us to turn away from Christ, to make us deny Christ rather than denying ourselves, taking up the cross and following Jesus. The psalmist is distressed. He's broken. He hears the whispering of the many scheming against him, and he calls on God to deliver him from the hands of those enemies and to be saved in his steadfast love. When I first looked at this psalm, my mind was cast towards Peter, broken and distressed after realising what he had done in denying Christ. Remember that he wept bitterly. But we must also remember that Jesus experienced that rejection and betrayal himself. Maybe this psalm would have come to mind for Jesus at the time. Verse 11 tells us, I am the scorn of all my adversaries, a horror to my neighbours, an object of dread to my acquaintances. Jesus knew that he would be betrayed. He knew that he would be denied. And he knew that many would desert him and flee. Jesus would have known the Psalms. He would have known the Psalms of praise and worship, but also the Psalms of lament. We too can know the Psalms. We too can use them in our praise and our worship, but also in our times of lament. So when we find ourselves in the position of Peter, denying Christ, remember that we can come to the Psalms to find solace before God. We only read the middle part of the psalm today, but it's a psalm of 3 parts, a prayer of lament, but surrounded by prayers of trust and praise. You can know that when we fail Jesus, when we head off in a different direction, we can weep bitterly, just as Peter did. And we can cry out in despair and know that God will save us. Even Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And Jesus trusted God in his despair when he cried out, Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me. Yet not what I want, but what you want. So as we enter into this time of reflection, I want to share with you a meditation that I wrote based on Peter denying Christ. It's a narrative that looks back at the events as if from Peter's perspective. At the end, we'll enter into a period of silent reflection and perhaps ask ourselves before God, have we ever denied him? Three times I denied him. I said I wouldn't. I don't know what came over me, but he knew. He knew all along. He predicted it. He said, truly I tell you, before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. But I said I would never deny him. I was in the courtyard, crouched down by the fire, warming myself up. I was keeping a low profile, trying to disappear into the background, watching from a distance. I wanted to see what was happening. It was then that the girl challenged me. She said, you were with Jesus, the man from Nazareth. I panicked. I was scared. I denied it. I don't know what came over me. I mean, it wasn't a direct denial as such. I was trying to deflect attention away from myself. Just a little white lie. I said I didn't know what she was talking about. I had to make myself scarce. I got up and headed towards the gateway. But as I was walking away, I heard her again. But this time she was telling the people around her that I was with Jesus. Of course, she was right. I could have just ignored it. She wasn't talking to me directly, but I overheard her telling the others. I should have just carried on towards the gateway, pretending I didn't hear her. But I did it again. I denied him a second time, but this time a direct denial. That little white lie, trying to deflect attention away, had grown into a direct denial. I was digging myself deeper into the hole. I carried on towards the gateway, but this time some others repeated the accusation. It seems everyone knew, everyone realised who I was. There was no turning back now. I was done for. Again, I denied him, a third time. But this time I even called down curses and swore to them that I didn't know who Jesus was. It was then that the cock crowed. It stopped me in my tracks. I turned towards Jesus. He heard it too. He looked straight at me. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. That was the moment. The moment of realization when it all came crashing down and I remembered what Jesus had said. I went outside and wept bitterly. How could I let him down? How could I fail him in this way? How can I ever repay him? From that moment on, whenever I hear the sound of a cock crowing, I'm reminded of how I failed Jesus. But let me ask you a question. Have you heard the cock crow? As we reflect on the account of Peter denying Christ, in the silence, let us look back to times when we might have heard the cock crow. The times when we might have failed Jesus or denied him. But then, let us rejoice in our hearts that Jesus, as he did with Peter, took hold of us, held us tight, told us that he loves us, and restored us in mind, body, and spirit. Let us also, in the silence, look ahead at what is to come as we ask God to protect us and guide us as he helps us to avoid the sound of the cock crowing in the future. And as we enter into that silence, I leave you with some words from John Stott. We must not minimise the seriousness of Peter's denials, but nor must we underestimate the greatness of God's forgiving and transforming grace. We must remember that in due course Peter was restored and became a rock-like leader in the church. So in the silence, let us reflect as we gather round the fire, just as Peter did as he tried to keep a low profile, watching from a distance.